Hello chess friends, this is Video Master Valery Lvov, and in our lecture today I want to continue my discussion on the attacking chess and what kind of ideas we can use to attack the opponent, and especially the opponent's king. So today I want to actually include in my lecture something about the center in chess. As you know, the chess center is the most important part of the board, and if a player has total control of this part of the board, he's often well on the way to victory. So this is one reason why a player must always be alert to break in the center, and sometimes this could be so strong that it could totally lead the opponent to lost position. So I want to show you one very interesting game that basically shows an example of thematic break in the center, which helped White on his way to victory in a very instructive way. So White was a very strong chess master named Pert against another Indian grandmaster, Ganguly. This game was played at the British Championship in Torquay in 2002, and White employed a typical combination, a strike in the center, that basically gave him a big advantage. So let's have a look at this. White played d4. Now Black continued with d5, and White played c4. So we have the Queen's Gambit accepted after d takes c4, and White played in this position e3. It's more common these days to see, instead of e3, the move knight f3, because it denies the opportunity for Black to play e7 to e5. But anyways, e3 is also a good continuation. So after e3, of course, Black has this opportunity to play something like e5 straight away, and eventually if White takes bishop takes c4, e takes d4, e takes d4, White is getting an isolated pawn on d4. But this isolated pawn could also have some strong sides, like it controls d4 at e5 in the same time. White's bishop on c4 has a very active position, and well, White's position seems to be quite good. I don't say that it's a bad line. So now after e3, Black played knight f6 in this game, and White simply captured on c4, transposing to the normal Queen's Gambit accepted. Now Black does never try to protect the c4 pawn, just because that's not possible, but White has too many ways to win it back. So after bishop takes c4, Black played e6 at this point, just setting a free way for the dark square bishop to be developed on e7 and to provide the castles. And White simply played in this position knight f3. So I'm going quickly through these moves because this is all very known. So probably most of you actually know about the basic ideas of the Queen's Gambit accepted. Like for instance, White is trying, still with the first moves, to try and develop his pieces as fast as he can, with some idea to push the pawns forward and eventually create some problems against Black's king side. So that's the basic idea. Black played c5, and White simply castled at this point. After the castles, of course, Black has a chance to play bishop e7, but some players actually like to go in this position with the move a6. So it forces White either to take his bishop back in order to meet b5 with some better choice, like not to be forced to get the bishop, or maybe to play a4, that will actually give Black the opportunity, after some moves like knight c5 and the exchange, to use the b4 square as a stepping stone to making a strong blockade at the d5 square. So that's a kind of a good idea for Black to continue with. It was played in this game, and in our game today, White played bishop to b3, simply taking the bishop back on a safer position. Now Black exchanged, one of the typical ideas, and in fact now it seems that White has a kind of bigger opportunities, like he can take with the queen as well as with the knight, or maybe even the pawn. But as on many occasions in the Queen's Gambit accepted, White always accepts to create an isolated pawn by himself, just because that isolated pawn has many strong sides. If White takes with the knight, actually, it's a kind of awkward way to proceed in that opening, because black can play simply something like bishop e7, that he can provide the castles, and there are no problems that white can create against black's development. Now remember that if you want to attack your opponent, and if you wanted to have the initiative or something like that, you always need to play in the most active way possible, and always to attempt to control the center. So after c takes d4, white simply recaptured with his central pawn. And now basically the center is equal. White's pawn is on d4, black has also a central pawn on e6, but basically white's pawn on d4 is a lot stronger than black's on e6, because white's pawn is a lot more advanced, and also it controls two squares, like the one where it is on d4 and also e5. And black's pawn on e6 is quite passive right now. It even makes the light square bishop on c8 a very passive piece. So after e takes d4, black played knight to c6 in the game, and white simply continued with knight to c3, a quick development of the minor pieces. Black played bishop to e7, and white developed his dark square bishop to g5. Of course, it's much better than the usual bishop f4, because it creates some pressure against the f6 knight, and as you'll see in future, this could be used by white to make some really definite problems against black's king side. So he castled right now, and white simply continued with queen d2. Now, as you will see, almost in every game where a chess master is trying to employ attack, you will never notice a kind of attack with just few pieces. So we already know that 3 pieces are basically needed for a successful attack. So the other thing, like 2 pieces, we call diversion. So the diversion is not a successful attack, it's something bad. So it has the idea to surprise the opponent, but it doesn't have some good positional background behind. So eventually the diversion is with less pieces or unsupported pieces to threat the opponent and create some combinational or tactical threats against this position. So that's something bad. If the opponent is simply remains quiet and calm, then he will find his best alternatives to meet our unprotected and unsupported attack, and we won't get anything from it. So only the waste of time. So in this position, white decided to make the connection between the rooks to finish the development, and then eventually to continue with some attacking ideas. Now black played knight a5, and this is the first bad idea in the position. Now black is putting his knight on the edge, and there is this kind of very important tip that is valid in most of the openings, that a knight put at the edge of the board, like the end files, the rook files H and A, is really bad for a couple of reasons. It's bad on the first place because it has a reduced amount of squares, so it has no activity or very small activity at all, and also it doesn't do a lot of things. It doesn't control the center, which is the most important part of the board. So white simply took his bishop back to c2, and as you can see now, black's knight to c4 wouldn't really do anything in particular. Like after queen e2, if black takes on b2, that knight could be simply trapped. White can even go with something like bishop c1. The knight will be attacked, and if black protects it, well, there will be even something like knight b1. And in that interesting position, black is going to lose his knight, or maybe if he tries to protect all the pieces, already he is going in white's territory. Take, and after bishop takes b2, queen takes b2, and the simple bishop takes f1 check, black is losing the queen next move. For this reason, actually, he can't really go with only one knight against white's whole prepared army, so that's of course something suicidal, and after the move bishop c2, black decided to develop the rest of the pieces with the move b7 to b5. And now, already seeing that the pieces are prepared, white decided, before to develop his rooks, to do quickly, since the opening is already finished. Well, we can consider the opening is finished when there are no pieces which interrupt the coordination, so-called coordination, connection between the rooks. So he decided to strike in with the first move, queen f4. Taking one piece on a forward square against the opponent's king side. That seems quite dangerous actually, and especially after bishop b7, white put his queen on h4. So we see that already white got a threat. He's now threatening to take on f6, and at the next move he wants to play queen takes h7 checkmate. So through the interaction between the c2 bishop, the queen on h4, and the bishop on g5, white already begins to create really the difficult threats against black's position. For instance, now even a move like h6 would not really be preferable for black. White can simply recapture over there, and after bishop takes h6, g takes h6, and the simple queen takes h6, black's position will be disgusting. His king will have no pawns that will cover, well, I don't think that he has successful ways to protect against threats like knight g5, then bishop h7 check. So a lot of ideas, even knight h7 is possible. So those three pieces right in front of black's king that has no pieces or pawns to cover will be simply lethal. So that's why after queen h4, black decided to cover the king through g6. And now if we look at the position, we see that most of white's pieces, that I mean the queen, the minor pieces which are pointed to the king side, have taken the most active positions available. So now if we include the rooks, it seems that we'll have the perfect position to strike through and eventually to crush black. However, now sometimes you should know that the time is not enough for you to include all the pieces. Like now, if white goes with rook e1, for example, right now, black will simply take the knight on f3, and in fact he will break the pawn structure. After g takes f, here are the pawn weaknesses on the king's side, the broken position of the king, and also the d4 weakness that will arise. So that's something that white doesn't want to allow. Either if he starts with something like knight e5, probably black will play something like knight d5, and he has the opportunities to offer exchanges to white. Now the bishop on g5 is under attack, and if white simply exchanges it, like after bishop takes c7, black can recapture with the own queen, then he will even exchange on the c3, square the knight, and I don't think that from white's attack something could actually be available to some additional threats. So nothing will left here from white to attack with. For this reason, actually, white decided something else. Since he doesn't have the time to employ all the pieces on perfect positions, maybe, since we have the enough amount, we can actually strike directly and try to put some problems. So white played here the amazing move of pawn to d5, something that really was unexpected by black, and shows how really strong is always to point the center. This move performs several useful functions for white. First, it opens up the d file for white's rooks, or for one of white's rooks. And secondly, most important, the coordination of the black pieces is severely impaired after the move d5. So now, as you can see, if black plays knight takes d5 right now, the difference between the variation that we looked at with rook f to e1 and knight to d5 is that basically now after knight takes d5, bishop takes g5, there will be this knight takes g5 coming, and black will simply be checkmated next move. So queen takes h7 is a threat, so black cannot take the knight on d5, and he loses. That's why basically black cannot take there with the knight. So what about if he takes with the pawn? That seems quite logical, right? However, even if he takes with the pawn, then still white can get really very strong threats with a simple move like rook f to e1. Now, as you can see, the bishop on e7 is threatened, and in the same time, after it is being taken, the knight on f6 will be hanging. Now, black has to play something like king h7, king to g7 probably, but then white can even employ something quite simple, like say knight to d4 probably, or even queen h6 check. So black's position will be really tough, and well, say in this case, after something like rook e8, white can even employ something like bishop takes g6 as a combination. So the plan is that if black takes with the f pawn, there will be this check, and black loses the queen. if he takes with the king, then there is the checkmate coming from h6. And in fact, if he takes with the h pawn, there is this beautiful rook takes e7 coming, queen takes e7, knight f5 check. And the point is not really that we want to win something like with queen h6 and bishop takes f6, because as you can see, there is the checkmate on e1 that will flow. But here is even the stronger bishop to h6 coming. So in this position, no matter where black's king actually goes, he's losing. If he goes on the g file, either on g6 or g8, then white follows with queen g5 check, and when black retreats the king anywhere, then queen g7 check actually made black. If he goes either on the h file with king h7 or king h8, then bishop to f8 check will actually win. So king g8, bishop takes to e7, and next move after queen takes f6. White ends up with a lot of material like queen for a rook and bishop. Additionally to the attack that he has, the continuing attack that does not really stop. Maybe h4, rook to d1, d3, g3. So black's king is in real danger. So that variation will actually be bad for black. He's going to end up in that really stupid position, which big material damages and upcoming attack from white's side. And this means that in this case, after knight d4 and all of these moves, black will experience really big problems. Just in case to show you that after h5, there is this rook e6, really beautiful. Now white simply sets a free square for the other rook to go, and black cannot really move his queen. He can't take the rook because of knight takes e6 check, and the queen will be lost. If he takes the queen, then there will be even bishop takes f6 check. So black simply loses. That's a disgusting position that actually shows the activities of white's pieces and why black cannot really take there with his pawn. He has to take with the bishop as he did. This is the only opportunity. But now it's amazing though to see how white simply employed initiative and exactly in the following the principle that when we want to attack the opponent's king, we should concentrate as many pieces as we can on the very same area where the opponent's king actually is. It's very important also to follow the rule of the speed, that when we want to have a successful attack, we have to be very fast, just before the opponent to get most of his pieces on defending positions. That will be a lot harder after it. So knight e4 was played. Of course, as you can see, black cannot take there with his knight, since the bishop on e7 is hanging. So he captured on e4 with his bishop, and then white simply took there with his light square bishop. Now, as you can see, practically the knight on f6 is pinned to the bishop on e7 and the queen on d8, just because the one bishop on e7 is undermined by white's battery of the queen on h4 and the bishop on g5. So after bishop takes e4, the only move for black remains rook a7. Now it seems quite dangerous, that the whole position, because black's king is already weakened. Like there are weak dark squares that are not covered by his bishop. White has the pair of bishops, and it seems that he has a kind of really strong upcoming attack. But let's have a look what happened in this game. After rook a7, white played the simple rook a to d1, attacking over black's queen. Now the only way to keep the knight on f6 is not to retreat the queen or play anything else, but actually to go with knight e5. Otherwise, black loses his knight. So at this point, white didn't want to exchange, but what was actually instructive in our previous examples that we looked at in attacking chess series, as many pieces we include or develop, even better, we are strengthening the attack in the best way possible. Rook f to e1. So now black was experiencing already big problems. So he has a hard time, since he cannot take so easily. After bishop takes g5, knight takes g5, and something like h5. Well, I consider that even after a move like g4, the h5 pawn will be in trouble, since the mate on h7 that is following afterwards. And in fact, if he can't exchange, then he's remaining on all of these pins and threats over the e7 bishop and the knight on the e5. So black played f6 in this position, and we see that for the sacrificed pawn, white has serious pressure on the king side and and down the D and E files. That is, of course, totally enough compensation, even if we count the material. So white simply played bishop to h6 in this position, threatening black's f8 rook. And well, here black made a mistake by getting his rook on e8. It was much better to put it on f7, just because it would have been closer to the king and it would have support h7. But even in this case, after a simple bishop to f1, white is going to open up his rooks, attack against black's central, knight on d5, and the pawn that is protecting him, the one on e6. And I think that black's position is really difficult at this point. So black played rook e8, and here white made the simple queen to g4. As you can see, white is already creating deadly threats like bishop takes g6. And in fact, if black goes with something like f5, then the simple bishop takes f5 is practically decisive. The point behind is that when black recaptures with the own e pawn, then the d5 knight is without protection, but it's not about the knight, it's about queen d4. Now there white is getting a triple threat on the rook on a7, the knight on d5, and the checkmate on g7. Black will actually lose not only the knight, but he might lose even some additional material, like the rook or something like that. So that's really terrible. This variation is horrible for black to continue with. And black tried the last hope, probably to exchange pieces, which will somehow weaken white's attack, and try on his own to take some other pieces to protect his king side. So he made bishop to f8. But of course, now here comes the question, should we really leave the attack and basically continue with something like bishop f4 if we want to keep the bishop, or maybe exchange? So the one move will take our piece back, the other move will actually exchange a piece. So what to do? Both of these variations seem to be not so good. And here, to our support comes the simple principle which says, when we don't know what to do and we still feel that there should be something like a combination or idea that will break the opponent's position, consider the simplest options that are obvious. So many players really begin thinking on the long distant variations, and they are searching for something that they don't know about, and that is because they exactly the reason why they cannot find it. So this is all because they are trying to see the complicated and they don't see the simple. So here is this first rule, straightforward rule when attacking. Always when attacking, on the first place begin with the forcing moves. Those moves that contain direct threats, contain checks, or maybe captures. Most frequently, these are the strong moves that will actually guarantee us advantage. So of course, the obvious bishop takes g6 is breaking black's defense, and of course he has no defense after it. H takes g6 followed, and now white made the simple queen takes g6 check. As you can see, black's king is now in trouble, and in fact if he plays something like king to h8 right here, there is the simple rook takes d5 coming. Now if black takes with the queen, queen takes e8 is directly winning because the bishop is pinned to the king. And if he takes with the e pawn, then the e1 rook is opened, and after rook takes e8, white is winning. So in fact, after queen takes g6, the only hope for black is to proceed with bishop to g7 to prevent the check. But of course, the same idea comes to life. Rook takes d5, and actually from this point, white already equalizes the material, and not only, but he's getting a pawn up. This is just informative for the records if you are worried about the material. Always you should know that the initiative, the most active pieces will take that material back with the commission. So basically it's not about the material, it's about the piece activity. The pieces, the current pieces create the advantage, create the attack, not the material advantage. So there is rook takes d5, and white is playing on the king side with a lot more pieces than black can actually include. In fact, it's very interesting to take a look at the knight on a5 that is on the edge of the board, and he's doing absolutely nothing. Black has to think to rescue, and in the same time he's keeping one strong piece like the knight on a5 at the edge of the board. That's disgusting. So he played queen takes d5, of course. It's totally lethal if white's rook enters on the king's side with rook h5. So black is practically forced to take it. Queen takes, and white continued with queen takes e8 check. Now black has to play king to h7, the only chance to get the king away. But of course, bishop takes g7 was played. Rook takes g7. Now black found, okay, I included my rook, so maybe it's a bit better for me now. But of course, white didn't leave the attack. Now I want to give you a very short tip that you can use in your own games, and that's something very important about where, in which cases you can eventually realize the advantage at the best way possible. Many players think that when they take some advantage, like material advantage, the most reliable and secure way to realize it, they say, okay, the best way to realize is to go back and try to be more safe, more secure. And I would claim exactly the contrary. I don't mean that you should risk your position or your advantage, but still, remember that actually you can exploit your advantage in a best way if you don't stop to attack. So I don't mean you to risk, but be initiative, remain active. Don't go back, don't really take your pieces back, but simply continue to attack your opponent. So that way you will see how he will not only stop thinking about some counter resources and attacks against your position, but he will even experience some additional problems to defend, because you will practically use this more material like pawn, piece, or anything to create even more threats against this position. So remember this really important tip. When you take material more, don't consider to be passive to get your piece on protecting positions, but use this advantage to continue and really attack his position. That's something very important that you can use when realizing a material advantage. So white now played the simple rook e3, and here the rook joins in. Now, as you can see, there is this X-ray of white's rook to the h3 little square, and in fact, when black continued with knight c4 right now, hitting the rook, white simply employed knight to g5 check, an obvious but very beautiful combination that practically finishes the game. So the point is that if black takes either with the queen or with the pawn, doesn't matter, rook h3 check is coming, and next move basically white wins the queen for the rook and ends up with totally winning position with queen against rook and pawn, rook and knight, and he then collects the pawns with the queen and wins easily. So black took there with the rook. Rook takes g5 came, but white simply played queen f7 check, king to h6, and now the simple queen takes f6 check. Now rook h3 can come at every time, and after king h7 actually, and the queen f7 check, black simply resigned. Not because there is rook h3. Rook h3 now is taken because black has rook h5 to answer with, but in fact after king h6, if black was about to continue with king h6, there is this little rook takes e6 check, and in fact black has no way to save. He has to sacrifice the queen just because there is no other way to protect the king in the checkmate. King h8 is also met by the simple rook h3, and now rook h5 is not working because h5 is controlled by two squares, mainly by the queen and the rook, so black is losing. For this reason, he resigned still when white played queen to f7 check, and that is why, because black's king has no way to be saved. It's quite shocking, really, for this game how quickly black's position fell apart after white's 15-move pawn to d5. This move worked because white's pieces were already perfectly placed, while black had weakened his king side with a move like g6, and also stupid moves like knight a5 had taken his pieces away from the center. Again, common tips to watch for, and of course the idea that the center and the control of it has a really very big influence on the opportunity to attack the opponent. You can take that, and always when attacking, try to take maximum control over the center. This way, you will be able to really regroup more pieces on the area where you want to attack, and also exactly some combinations can happen in that center, like d5. Okay, so thank you very much, and this is again Video Master Vorolev with a lecture on the attacking chess. See you next time.